All right. Well, good afternoon. We are pre-recording this edition of the Weekly Member Spotlight because we're going into the 4th of July weekend. And I am so excited to be here with someone who I've never had the honor of sitting down with like this. So I wanted to start off by just saying thank you very much, Mr. Pinnegar, for agreeing to be part of our Weekly Member Spotlight initiative. How are you today?
I'm good, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to take the credit for this, but Mr. Franks, our executive director for the GCNKAA, in an effort to help us kind of get our schedule organized for this weekly member spotlight, sent me a list of people from the National Apartment Association who he thought he could convince to be our guest. And lo and behold, our very first one is none other than the president and CEO of the National Apartment Association, Mr. Bob Pinnegar. So again, Bob, welcome.
Thank you.
I'd
Good to be
love,
here.
yeah, I'd love to ask you just to take a moment and for the folks who are watching this that might not know exactly who you are, to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do with the National Apartment Association.
Okay, well, I'm president and CEO of the National Apartment Association, so I'm Mark Frank's counterpart at the national organization, and I've been in this role for about 4 years now. And originally, I started off 25 years ago working for the San Diego County Apartment Association, and back then, I came to work for them doing all the government affairs work and all the downtown work with the city council members and county board of supervisors. And then after about 7 or 8 years, the executive director left and they made me the offer to take over the job running the association. And I was there for 16 plus years. And so
Wow.
from there, then Doug Culkin, my predecessor, I was at a American Society of Association Executives conference, and he came up and said, "I want you to come and be my COO and help me run the association. So when I'm traveling, things can function, and I have to stop and wait for me to get back." To which I almost said, "Why would I want to leave San Diego to go to Washington, D.C.?" But as I thought about it, I thought it's probably a good career
Very
move.
valid
How I
question.
got here. Yeah. So there's hot and humid days. So I go, "Why did I do this?" But
Right.
by and large, it's been a very very fun thing to take this job and be here.
So are you from San Diego then?
Born and raised in California. So my
Mhm.
parents, Northern California, my parents moved to San Diego. The company my dad worked for transferred, moved to San Diego when I was about 10 years old. So
Okay.
pretty much my whole life, adult life, I was in San Diego before coming here.
So we joked I wasn't going to put you on the spot, but I do have a couple of questions that came to mind listening to your storied career. What have been some of the major changes in the industry that you've been a part of over the last, call it, decade or so?
It's funny when I first came to work for the association, there were regional companies,
Mhm.
companies that were in the county or maybe were in the city.
Mhm.
If you managed 1,000, 1,500 units, you were a large player. And I was there right at that point in time where you began to see the REITs coming in, you began to see institutional investors coming in, and the market changed dramatically. And I
Mhm.
remember used to have a executive group that would meet, and we as staff had a lot of questions internally. Should we bring in these new players in the market to come and sit down with the people, basically with the owner operators? And we actually brought the question to them, and they said, "We want to learn as much as we possibly can from those operators. Bring them in." And so that was the beginning of the merging of the two, I guess you'd say, levels of the association together. I mean, I've
Right.
often looked at the industry because the association in San Diego is over 100 years old now. And so you had those original, independent rental owners who purchased and ran the rental properties. And then
Mhm.
you had the generational wealth families that had acquired and were running larger portfolios. And then you had the institutional dollars that came in and the rise of fee management companies and how they became so large, and then
Mhm.
the REITs and all the others that are there. So it's been an interesting time to be here to really see things shift and change, and
Right.
how much things have professionalized over the last 20, 25 years is amazing.
I agree. I think back to when I got involved in the industry, it was the early 90s, and I was a sales consultant in college, didn't know anything about the way the world worked. And when I kind of look back on the last 20 years, just the level of sophistication, the technology, the software, back in the day, it was people paid rent in cash at one point in time when I was working on site, and you had a receipt book and the handwritten logs. And now, I mean, we're doing virtual tours and the software is unbelievable. We talked a few minutes before this interview started a little bit about Apartmentalize, the National Apartment Association's education conference and trade show. And that's one thing, even 5 years or so, that I've noticed the level of technology that is kind of showcased at the trade show event there. Is there any one form of technology or management sophistication that you think has truly been a game changer for our industry?
Well, if you think back, I think revenue management was one of the big game changers, because that getting people to understand that while their hunch and their idea and their thought is something they were used to, really adapting and changing. Mm-hmm. And as that has evolved, I mean, now we have these venture capital dollars that are flowing into the industry. And I think last time I looked, it was well over $6 billion have been spent in our space in commercial real estate, and much of that in on the property management side. And I think that this industry is one that doesn't change quickly. I mean, if you wanted to be a technology adapter and early adopter, you probably went to Silicon Valley and went there. You got involved in real estate if you want something that was a little more stable and consistent. Right. But what I've seen over the last several years, even like you said, the last 3 to 5 years, the amount of tech companies that are on the floor, it feels like a different industry. Really, and I think that the companies that are holding back and not necessarily embracing technology, because this is an industry where we don't have huge margins, and it's the conversation I've had with people saying, well, once they mature from a technology standpoint and they integrate with my software, then I'll think about taking a look at what they have. And I think some of these new ideas that are coming out right now, I think they're things we need to start looking at sooner. I think in some ways it's something that we as the National Apartment Association need to foster conversations around that, so people are comfortable with it and understand it before they go and have a conversation with somebody at a booth.
Right. Something else that just came to mind as you were talking is the fact that you can now get a 4-year college degree in property management, which is something that was completely foreign, 20 years ago. And now to know that there are programs that exist at Ball State University, for example, in Indiana, where you can get a property management degree. It used to be hospitality kind of blended into our industry, but now you've got not only our designations through the National Apartment Association, but also collegiate education geared toward this industry.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Ball State, Virginia Tech, there's others around the country, and we've been actually trying to work with universities and junior colleges for maintenance, the maintenance side as well, because it's a whole. I mean, we have at any point in time, there's 10,000 open jobs in this industry around the country that need to be filled, and we're desperately trying to fill them. And so we've been trying to work with various institutions all through the higher education spectrum to try to get them to look at this as an industry. And 4-year institutions I mentioned about how we're resistant to change. The university system, it's like a dinosaur trying to get it to move. The Education Institute and Maureen and her team have been doing a great job, and Sarah, to make those connections and reach out and start those conversations. But it takes time to get those programs going, and you really need a champion within the school that is really going to carry it and bring it forward.
Definitely. So I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about what a year 2020 has been. What a time to be alive, huh? And in life in general, but in this industry especially, it's been really fascinating to be part of an industry that provides an essential basic need through housing. And one of the things that I've been most proud of throughout the last, 3 or 4 months in what's gone on in our country with both COVID and the racial unrest is the leadership and the stance that the apartment associations across the country, led by the National Apartment Association, has taken at both of those very, challenging positions. And I'd love to invite you just to talk a little bit about how the National Apartment Association reacted to both COVID and then the racial unrest from a couple of months ago.
Sure, I'd love to talk about it. But before I do that, I'd like to say I'm really proud of the way the industry and our affiliate network has really come together to work, because we provide information and resources, but the members actually touch the association. They touch our network at the local level. And so,
Right.
we had our apartmentalized our advocate conference was going on at the beginning of March. And so as we were going into it, to the conference, things started to get a little more serious. You started to see media coverage change. And we were one of the last groups that was in the Capitol. I mean, the next day, the Capitol was shut down to visitors.
Yeah.
And then we had
it was the light switch.
Yeah, the light switch went off. And,
Yep.
and we had spent the previous 6 weeks getting ready for Advocate. And then usually there's a time when you have a little bit of rest before getting ready for Apartmentalize, and there was no rest. So from there, we went straight into preparing for COVID. And I mean, nobody had a pandemic playbook before this. And we began to have meetings. I mean, we're having staff meetings on a daily basis through the weekends to organize materials and content and information. They're working with our operations committee and our volunteer leaders. And we were very quickly able to stand up a lot of information in webinars, a web page that has information, and we continue to build on top of that. But the idea behind this is that we need to provide value to the industry now, because if we don't provide value to the industry now and the industry flounders, then we're lost in the future.
Right.
And so I'm really happy with the staff and what they've done in coming together and really working on that. At the same time, we were going to a virtual environment, which just a few years ago, we had made the decision that, everybody that could have a laptop should have a laptop so they can bring it home in case something happens. And we were very lucky that we had the infrastructure to do that, because otherwise we would have had a very difficult time in keeping things running.
Definitely.
So, yeah,
what I thought
we got a crash course in working from home and technology.
Yes, talk about technology for definitely. What I thought was so interesting about COVID is how a lot of the affiliates, the GCNKAA kind of locked arms with the GDAA, and I know the Columbus Apartment Association was sending out daily updates. And because we were all kind of going through this together, we relied on one another, and it wasn't just kind of one group for itself. It's everybody locked arms, and where we could create some support with one another, we did. The GCNKAA had a town hall every other week, and it's still going actually, with the GDAA to talk through, best practices and what's going on. And it kind of shifted from reaction to the pandemic and how are you operating, and what does it look like to still provide the essential service of housing for your customers, to then how do we manage the rent need, the rent relief situation that is still going on as well. And I just thought it was very reassuring to know, I represent a primary member. We manage about 35,000 apartments, but to have that support from, across our region and across the country, just, I think, made it easier for all of us to deal with. And we all kind of learned from one another. To your point, we didn't have a playbook for this.
No, and there was a lot of information sharing that was going on with various groups that were coming together and having conversations. And we were working with IREM on content and topics. And actually that relationship, we've had a long relationship with IREM and working together. And as we've transitioned into racial unrest and George Floyd killing, we had, it was like another COVID, because, okay, what do we do here? What do we do? And so we had a lot of conversations internally as far as working with our diversity and inclusion committee, and they put together we have a whole list of education that's going to be going on, and it's ramping up. In fact, we just got a great speaker from UNC, and he's actually addressed the board before, Dr. James Johnson, and he's a demographer. So it's looking at it from that standpoint, and what populations and trends and where things are going. And so we've been able to secure him to do a webinar. And we also, though, as we were talking about what we were doing, we were saying, okay, the National Multi-Housing Council is doing something and IREM is doing something. And so we had a call last week with all three groups. And so we had the staff and volunteers from the National Multi-Housing Council, from the National Apartment Association, and the Institute of Real Estate Management. And we're going to be working together to try to work on how can we coordinate things. And so if IREM is working on something that we can tap into, great. If they have something that we're working on, they want to tap into, great. Same thing with the National Multi-Housing Council. And the reason we did this, as we talked about, is we said, if we're truly going to be successful in addressing racial bias, then we need to work as an industry. And it's something that I've come to understand. There's somebody's going to be uncomfortable with what you say, no matter in this spectrum.
Right.
And even from a generational standpoint, I mean, what the silent generation and baby boomers, how they identify with the topic versus millennials and Gen Z, very different. And we have a staff that is the full spectrum. And so we've had conversations about this. And it's funny because in having the conversations of how baby boomers view things versus millennials or Gen Z, they had no idea. And so it was an interesting sort of sharing. We're having conversations. And I think what it is it's a series of conversations so we're more aware of what's going on and how do we act and what do we do as we go through this process. And, fair housing is such an integral part of this industry. And it's so important to us that this is the natural extension of that. And so we're going to be bringing a lot of good information and resources to the industry, that it will be available, that hopefully will be able to be tapped into in a timely manner, and we'll be in a better place as we go down the road.
I was so proud, again, of our industry. It was within days of the George Floyd killing that the National Apartment Association issued a statement that was very well written. I think you were the author of that statement or put it out on behalf of the NAA. And in one of these forums with our weekly spotlight, we actually chose to pause and reflect and read your statement. It was just very powerful. And if you think about the foundation of what we do, fair housing and civil rights is that foundation. And so I love what you said about it being a natural extension. And also the fact that our industry has embraced the opportunity for the or diversity and inclusion committee, and that kind of being at the forefront over the last couple of years is just very encouraging. And so thank you for your effort in making that something that we're going to continue to hear more about. Certainly the class that was offered up right away, unconscious bias, I think that was the Franklin Covey class that the NAA put out right away for free. That was incredible. I've talked to a lot of our folks who have taken that class and said that it was very worth their time, and look forward to more subject matter just like that coming out.
Yeah, in the first couple of days, we had 400 downloads of the course.
Wow!
And it's just been growing, ever since.
Right.
And I believe it's the end of July that because this is actually a course that is charged. There's a fee for it, and there's a portion of the fee that goes to NAA, but there's also a large portion of the fee that goes to the local affiliates. So the local affiliates have agreed to give up this revenue source for this period of time to allow this resource to be out there for the industry.
Well, that's fantastic. Remember how I told you at the beginning I might have a technical issue? I think
I'm
experiencing that right now. So it's frozen, but it's not disconnected yet. Can you still hear me, Bob?
I can hear you, yes. Yes, I can hear you.
I think it's me, but I think I heard everything that you were saying. So there we go. We're back. I said I was due a technical difficulty today, and here we go. Okay. Are you good? Can you hear me and see me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, more questions, and then we're going to shift gears and get to know you a little bit more on a personal level. But I wanted to ask you to share a memorable industry story. Having been around for 2.5 decades or so, I'm sure you've seen your fair share of interesting things in this industry. But what's one of your more memorable stories you could share with us?
There's so many, and I went back and forth as I was thinking about this question. And, this sort of reflects how the industry has changed. So it was a number of years ago. I had been at the association for maybe 3 or 4 years, and I was asked by the local police department to come in and help mediate a conversation. And they had a gang problem in a part of the city, and there were 2 apartment communities that were part of it. And one of the communities was a larger community. It was owned by one of our members, and they came in and said, okay, we're going to take care of it. And these are all the things we're going to do. The other property was, it was an independent rental owner who owned it, who was really not involved in the day-to-day management of the property. And their resident manager was there. And it was one of those things where the owner had his arms folded and he was leaning back in the chair and he wasn't listening to anything that was going on. And as the resident manager started to explain how she managed the property, there were 4 fair housing violations in her first opening comments. And so as we went through the process, and he was not interested in cooperating on this gang issue, I started to lean into him a little bit and said, sir, are you aware of the Fair Housing Act? Do you understand the penalties associated with it? And I went through and cited the things that the person had in the management of the property that was violating. And I said, you need to work with the city and work with the police department to address this issue, but you also need to get some training for your resident manager, because you're going to lose that property. And he shifted forward. He started to listen, and that's where the industry was back in the early 90s. And as you fast forward through all of this, when we got to, remember the Ebola, this is not the first time we've had major issues. When we had the Ebola scare in Texas, and the way the industry came together and worked to address issues and share information, because remember there was a nurse who, because there was a victim at the NIH, I believe down at Emory University, and then at I think it was Baylor in Texas, and there was a nurse who actually was contaminated and ended up bringing it home to the apartment community. And I remember the fear that went across the industry at that point in time, and how everybody came together to share information and figure out best practices. And it was another one of those situations. I mean, we didn't have it to the extreme we've had with COVID, but it was an example of the industry coming together and working as one to be successful. Because this is an industry where, yes, the properties compete for new residents, but the people still have relationships and connections, and they value each other. So you don't bring that sort of killer shark instinct into the interactions with people in the industry.
Right. So interesting to think about how we live with our customers too. The intimacy that this industry shares with our residents is unprecedented. I say this often, like, who else knows as much about you as your apartment manager? We know people's credit score. We know how your housekeeping is. We know, literally everything there is to how much money you make. We know everything in this very intimate way. And you live with us for a year or, 3. And it's this very interesting dynamic. And then when you layer in, the owners who invest their lifetime and their life savings, or, the funds that you're responsible for, perpetuating retirement funds and things like that. It's such a fascinating industry and client base to consider. So,
you think about it. I mean, if you're at the site level, you interact with people on a daily basis, and they're them intimately. But at the same point, you also work for the company, and so there's this balancing act you have between the two. It's like, yes, I know you, and we're friendly, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you. But by the same point, as you're saying, I also have an owner that there's certain performance expectations that have to be met, and I have to be fair to you, as fair to you as I'm going to be the next person that walks in. I was, because there's been a lot of media coverage with COVID and just everything going on in the industry.
Right.
Talking with a reporter and trying to make them understand. And I said, okay, somebody who's on site, they're the mayor, they're the police chief, they're the camp counselor.
Right.
And there's also the custodian to make sure everything is neat and clean and safe.
Yep.
And I said, those are a lot of hats to wear.
And that's just a few, right?
Yeah, just a few. Yeah, that's not Monday morning after a weekend.
That's exactly right.
Everything up. Yeah.
That's right. Well, what advice, Bob, would you offer up to folks who might just be getting involved in the industry, or who are thinking about getting involved in this industry?
This is an industry, because I've talked with my peers about their industries. And like I said before, this is an industry that is very embracing. My counterpart and Mark's counterpart with the Texas Apartment Association, he worked with, it was, I don't want to say it was the petroleum it was basically the package stores. So all the stores that are in the gas stations. And he comes to work for the apartment industry, and he goes, I've never hugged or been hugged so much in my entire life.
Right.
And I said, it's a group of huggers. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody is supportive of everybody else. And if you're looking for an industry with a career path, there's definitely a career path in this industry that you can advance and improve yourself. But it's also a very supportive environment all the way through. It doesn't matter if it is the people you work with, if it is the people that you come into contact with at the association through your involvement, if it's the supplier network that you work with. Everybody knows everybody, and relationships are more important and more valuable in this industry than they are in many others.
I would agree. Thank you for that. Well, can we shift gears and get to know you a little bit more as a person?
Sure.
We could talk all day about the apartment association and
That's what I do all day.
Whatnot, I know, but I'm very curious to get to know you a little bit. So let's start off and just tell us a little bit about your family and maybe where you are right now.
Right now I'm here in Washington, D.C. I have family still on the West Coast from being born and raised out there. In fact, my dad passed away about 4 years ago, so my mom has been held up for about 4 months with COVID, and we have conversations on a daily basis.
Yeah.
My brother and nieces and nephews have been helping her out, and I've been having conversations with her to explain that the things that you want at the grocery store may not actually be there, and that's why you don't have the same brand that you usually have when you go on your own.
Right.
So a lot of interaction with the family. It's kind of hard because you can't go out and see them, because especially in her condition, if she contracts it, it would be a very serious issue.
Oh yeah.
So that's sort of me and what's going on now.
What's the biggest difference in your lifestyle, would you say, about being on the East Coast versus the West Coast? Aside from wardrobe, naturally, right?
Yes, aside from the weather. This is the West Coast, at least in San Diego, you could unplug and unwind. This is a place that there is always something going on, and somebody always wants to talk about some aspects of work. In fact, the going joke in the DC area is that in the first 3 questions somebody asks you when they meet you, it is, what do you do? It's not, who are you? And those sort of things to get to know you. And part of that is DC is very much a town that everybody's from somewhere else.
Right.
So there's very few locals, and everybody's very transient. That's the downside of the city. Makes
sense. Are you a reader? And if so, what's one of your most memorable recent books?
That's funny, because up till this year, I traveled a ton. And I have a nightstand with 4 different books on it that are various levels of me remembering to take them on an airplane and read them. And so whenever I grab one, I'll have to open the book and go, okay, where was this? Okay, and I'll look at the boarding ticket usually,
right?
And figure out, okay, and then go on reading. About a month and a half ago, there was a book that one of the speakers in one of the many Zoom calls I was on, and it was about managing unsolvable problems. And I thought, if there's a book that I should read as somebody who runs an association, I should read this. And so I have that book, and I've gotten into it with the highlighter and the marker, but every time I open it up and read it for more than 10 minutes, I want to go take a nap. So that's going to be a tough one. I'm waiting for that one to come out on tape or Cliff Notes or something.
There you go.
Yeah, it used to be I'd read a lot of historical stuff, because it was always a good thing to end the day and then go to sleep. Now it seems like it's just there's so many things coming and going. I think I read more stuff on my phone than I do in print anymore.
Right. Well, and you probably have to stay briefed on what's going on everywhere and all the affiliate areas. So I'm sure you have plenty of reading during the day.
Yeah, there's no end.
TV or
no
movies. Yes.
Movies. It's fun. Yeah, I would say that if I was thinking about my favorite movie, it'd be Field of Dreams, because it's the beginning of summer. There's messages about family in there. There's a good story there and a lot of great characters. that's something it's a movie that I always at least once a year want to sit down
Hmm.
and watch and just relax and forget about the world.
Are you a sports fan?
Yeah, I mean, I love baseball,
Mm,
especially. I should put it this way: I love going to a baseball game.
there you go.
Watching baseball during regular season is something you really got to pay attention to. When you're in the playoffs, it's a different game because there's a
Right.
lot more strategy and things that are happening. But there's nothing like going to a baseball game. It was as far as football games are a little different. I used to be a Chargers fan, but when the team sold themselves out and went to Los Angeles, I just
Hmm.
can't bring myself to root for them right now, and I'm looking for another football team. So I'm sure
That would
somebody
probably
out
be
there will have a recommendation.
right, another much different experience, football on the East Coast versus the West Coast. Whew.
Years ago, I was probably about it was about a year before I left,
Mhm.
and so Doug and I were having this conversation, and I went to a game. San Diego has beautiful weather all the time.
Mhm.
We're in the very top of the stadium, and it is rainy and it is cold, and everybody's hunkered down, and it was miserable. And I remember sitting there watching the game, going, "Okay, if I'm having a hard time and not enjoying myself at a football game in San Diego, I'm never going to go to one when I'm on the East Coast.
Oh my
Way too cold.
goodness. Let me tell you, even in
I'll watch."
Cincinnati, Ohio, a good game is still not exactly comfortable. You might get a month or two, and we don't know what the playoffs are like around here, so I have no idea what that weather's like.
I think, but there's nothing like reruns and being able to run to the refrigerator and get a drink.
That's right. Now, I was going to ask you how you're faring without baseball right now, but I think it's coming back very soon, isn't it? Some
There's
agree.
talk about it coming back. So yeah,
Yes.
of course we won't be there to watch it physically, but
Right.
I'm sure there will be places to watch it.
Will be interesting to see how the fantasy leagues kind of change too, with all of the uh, changes to the schedule and what, a third of the number of games, practically a third. That'll
Yeah, yeah. There's going to be fewer games, and people are talking about the records from this season. How do they relate to the regular seasons
be
where you
right.
have 180 games? And so yeah, it's going to be there's a lot of questions to be answered.
Yeah, I don't think whoever wins the pennant this year will be able to hold their head too high. The other teams won't let them live it down that they
I
only
know
have the games. That's
they'll get smaller rings, because the rings are so big for the
there
winners. They'll
you
get
go.
smaller ones. There you
A few less carrots, right? Well, what about music? What's one of your favorite concerts that you've been to?
go. I'd have to say that I went to a Garth Brooks concert years ago, back when
Hmm.
he was in his heyday
Yeah.
and really at his peak of
Hmm.
his shows, and it was an amazing show. Just all the things that were going on, and I was there with Aunt cousins and all kinds of different
Hmm.
people. In fact, it was kind of funny because the person who had the tickets, it was her and her kids, my brother, myself. There was a couple of other people, and she was backing out of the garage, and we were all in the car in the big SUV, and she backed into her husband's truck.
Oh no.
Needless to say, everybody was packed into my car, and I drove.
Oops.
Yeah.
I've heard that he is quite the entertainer, and he won the Entertainer of the Year, not just a good musical show, but a good entertaining show to see.
Great entertainer.
And he's kind of come back for his second or third go around at this point in his career, and was doing some drive-in concerts.
Yeah,
He was scheduled to be in Cincinnati, I think, a month or so ago, and he did actually like a drive-in concert. So,
yeah. Now after he retired the first time, he tried out for spring training for the San Diego Padres. And
oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
I went to spring training that year, and of course, Padres lost, and which they usually do. Growing up a Padre fan, it's just something that always happens. But he came out afterwards, and he signed hats, baseball bats, pieces of paper for 2.5 hours. It
Oh,
was until
wow.
everybody was gone.
Yeah, I forgot
That
about
tells you
that.
something about him.
Yeah. I love Trisha Yearwood. She's probably one of my I since gosh, the 90s when she was just coming up, she has always been one of my favorite people. So when they got together, naturally I became a little
Yeah.
biased. And the Friends in Low Places, oh my goodness, if that didn't change your life, I don't know what would. I think I was in high school when that came out, and I was like, all right, all bets are off. I'm a country fan. And funny you said Padres. One of my favorite NAA events that I've ever been to was the Kelly Clarkson concert at Petco Field.
Yes.
Wow, to be able to stand there. And I'm like, I imagine for the Padre fans, that was an even better experience, but
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
my goodness, that was fun. Well, I've got just a couple more questions, Bob, and I'll let you get back to your afternoon. Again, thank you so much. This has been
Sure.
really fun to get to know you a little bit. So wanted to ask you, what's one of your most memorable vacations that you've had? And do you have one on the horizon once this COVID nonsense dissipates?
I don't have one on the horizon right now, but it gets me thinking. If I was thinking about a memorable vacation, it was the last vacation. I was back in the days of BlackBerry and went on a trip where the BlackBerries did not work. And it was the last vacation without a smartphone. And I remember there was a friend of mine who had to be connected to his company, the nature of the company, and had a satellite phone, because this is how long ago that was.
Wow.
And so would be out at all hours having conversations, and he said, do you need to use it? And I said, no. He goes, well, how can you do this? I said, well, the office knows where I'm staying. They know the fax number, the phone number. But I had a conversation saying, if the place is on fire, I can't do anything from here. So if you think of something you need from me from this distance, then let me know. I think that was the last time I had a vacation that I wasn't connected somehow, some way.
Wow.
So I think the next vacation, it'd be nice to be somewhere on a lake with a house, cabin, and a boat, and very little access to the internet. That would probably be the best. And books I could actually finish.
There you go. There you go. I could totally get behind that. And it's funny, I was just talking to a friend of mine about how much I miss Blackberries. I loved having the buttons and the little ball, and not that I could ever live without my smartphone, but I sure was a Blackberry fan. All right. Well, last question for you, and then we'll send you on your way for the rest of your week. How do you think the folks who have worked with you throughout your career would describe you as a leader?
When I left San Diego, there was this, we had a big dinner, and everybody had given me a series of letters that described that to me. And it was interesting because they saw me as somebody that they could learn from, which these are people who have been in the industry for decades, so I don't know how they could ever learn anything from me. But I think it's supportive, listening, having conversations, really having a conversation to fully understand what's going on, but also in such a way that the person that I'm working with, whether it is a volunteer leader that I'm working for, or whether it's somebody on staff, is how do we have a conversation so I understand what you're trying to accomplish, you understand what I'm trying to accomplish, and we can both learn from this process. I think if you can master that, which I still trying every day, I think that everybody wins.
I love that. And I can assure you, in this industry, probably as much as any industry, if you don't have a great support system, you're not going to make it 2.5 decades. That's for sure. And that's what I love so much about how we've come together as an industry in light of all of the, unimaginable things that have happened. The level of support from the national level to the state level to the local level, it's just been incredible. And not that I'm surprised, I would have certainly expected it, but it's overwhelming in the moment to have that kind of support. And thank you for your leadership at the national level. This is the first time I've had the honor of sitting down with you one-on-one, but I've certainly heard you speak at events and followed you as the leader of the National Apartment Association. So thank you for being the face of our industry at the national level, and thank you for all of the support to our leaders at the local level for sure.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, this is a huge industry, but it is a small world in which we live in this industry. So everybody touches somebody in some way somehow.
That is very well said, and that's a lesson. Whew, I didn't take long.
It's a lesson to be nice to
what
people
a
on the way up.
small little. It's a small little industry, that's for sure.
I worked when I first got out of school. I worked for a member of Congress, and he used to say, "Be nice to people on the way up because you're going to see them again on the way down."
Oh, yes, you will. We'll have to add that piece of advice in there. I'm giving you credit for that one.
Okay.
Well, thank you again, Bob. It has been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you again. Hopefully, I know Apartmentalize is still scheduled to take place now in Dallas in November.
In Dallas in November. And so hopefully we'll be able to see each other there. And we're going to be at the convention center in Dallas. And I think it's going to be a great show. And we haven't been to Texas it was probably decades and decades ago. So I'm not going to say we've never been, because somebody from Texas will see this and I will get an email and it'll be you're wrong. So,
Right.
but it's been a very long time since we've been to Texas. And I know that we have some great affiliates and members in Texas. So I think it'll be a great time. I know that during this uncertain time, everybody's kind of nervous. And that's why we also have a virtual version of the
Right.
conference. I mean, we're going to have 63 educational courses
That's
in
fun.
Dallas, and we're going to mirror that, but different format, different types of topics with the virtual event. So that way it's not a cookie cutter. And
Right.
so I think that way we can truly help the industry, because what everybody loves getting together, some people may not be able to, just because of the circumstances of family or health conditions or those sort of things. And so that's
Well, and
where
as you pointed out, we're huggers. And so for those people who can't refrain from all of the hugging, virtual hugs are perfectly acceptable.
there we go.
We're going to have to put our heads together for those of us who are attending and figure out what we're going to do in lieu of hugging, because
The elbow bump.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, elbow bump, the shoe bump, there we'll figure it out.
Well, yeah. You go to too many of the parties, the shoe bump's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, that's true.
Probably the elbow's better.
That's a good point. Well, again, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. We're going to air this live on Friday, and Bob, thank you on behalf of the GCNKAA for sure for all you do, and we look forward to rounding out 2020 in a much more positive light than we started off.
Thank you. I mean, you're a great association, great group there. Yeah, we're going to get through 2020, and we're going to enjoy 2021 all the more.
Agreed. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So long.
Thanks.